The story begins on Titan Station, a remote and deteriorating research outpost orbiting Saturn's largest moon. Once a beacon of scientific progress, the station now drifts in quiet isolation, awaiting decommission. Commander Elias Kane, a veteran astronaut nearing retirement, has been assigned to oversee the station's final shutdown. Elias descended into the frozen depths of Titan, the narrow ice tunnel pressing close around him like the ribs of some ancient, frozen leviathan. The drill drones had done their work too well, carving a path that led to a cavern shrouded in shadows and shimmering with frost. His boots crunched against the ice, every step amplified by the oppressive silence of the moon's desolation. The pulse was louder here, a low, rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. It was no longer just noise. It was alive, echoing thoughts he couldn't quite decipher. Ariel's voice crackled faintly over his comms, distorted and fragmented. Structural anomaly detected. Proceed with caution. Danger. Elias halted before a jagged opening in the ice, a faint blue glow emanating from within. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The chamber beyond was immense, its walls glittering like shattered starlight. At its center, buried halfway in the ice, was a structure, a beacon, but not like anything he'd ever seen. It was ancient, corroded, and utterly alien. The metallic surface seemed to ripple under his gaze, as though rejecting the reality around it. Then he saw it, the escape pod, a relic from another era, its surface dulled by centuries of frost and time. As he approached, the beacon's pulse quickened, its rhythm aligning with his heartbeat. Engraved on the pod's exterior, barely legible through the frost, was a name. His name, Elias Kane. He froze. His breath caught in his throat as his gloved fingers wiped away the frost from the viewport. Inside, slumped and lifeless, was a figure. The uniform was old, patched with insignias long retired. The face behind the cracked visor was unmistakable. It was him, older, haggard, eyes staring blankly into eternity. The pulse surged, a piercing tone now, as if the beacon were screaming. Ariel's voice broke through, harsh and panicked. "Elias, you're not alone down there." For a moment he thought he saw movement behind the frozen corpse, shadows shifting where there should have been none. Elias staggered back, his breath fogging up the inside of his helmet. His mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible. He stared at the frozen corpse, his corpse, locked in silent stillness. The ice seemed to cling to it possessively, as though it had been waiting for him to arrive. "Ariel," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "run a biosignature scan on the pod." Static filled his earpiece, followed by the AI's flickering response. "Scan, inconclusive. No, biological activity detected, but," a brief pause, then a garbled fragment, "matching DNA signature, 100%. The words echoed in his skull. "It's me." The beacon's pulse deepened, becoming almost a growl beneath the surface. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, curling into his chest like cold fingers wrapping around his ribs. It seemed to tug at him, luring him forward, whispering without words. Elias shook his head, forcing his feet backward, away from the pod. He turned his helmet light toward the walls of the chamber, and that's when he noticed the markings. Symbols and patterns, half buried under layers of frost, spiraled outward from the beacon. They weren't alien, they were human. Blueprints, technical schematics. Elias stepped closer, scanning the ice. The lines traced the design of an engine, something massive and intricate, embedded in the very ice beneath his feet. But it wasn't just any engine. Recognition crept in, unwelcome and cold. He had seen this design before, years ago in prototype sketches, long dismissed as impossible. A time displacement engine. "Ariel, confirm," he muttered, though he already knew. The AI hesitated. "Schematics? Consistent with Project Kronos. Project was terminated 40 years ago. Kronos. Buried in classified reports. A failed experiment. A dead idea. Yet here it was, decaying in the ice, humming with unnatural life. But why was it here? And how?" The pulse shifted again, now breaking into irregular patterns, Short bursts, long pauses, a message, Morse code. Elias's blood ran cold as he translated the rhythm, the words clawing their way into his mind. Do not activate. His breath caught. He hadn't touched anything, yet the beacon was warning him. Or was it a memory of a warning? A remnant of something already spoken? His eyes snapped back to the frozen corpse in the pod. Had that version of him triggered this? Was this all a repeating cycle, drawing him here again and again? A low, distant crack echoed through the chamber. Elias spun, scanning the walls. The ice was shifting. The pulse was awakening something deeper. Ariel, he hissed. What's happening? Seismic activity, increasing, suggests immediate extraction. But Elias didn't move. The walls of the cavern were starting to fracture, hairline cracks spreading outward like spiderwebs. Yet in the corner of his eye, something else moved. A flicker, behind the pod. Elias raised his light. A shape lingered just beyond the edge of illumination. Not ice, not shadow, a figure watching. Its outline was blurred like static, and when Elias tried to focus, it vanished into the gloom. Ariel! His voice was barely a whisper now. Silence, static. Then quietly his own voice came through the comms. But not now. Older. Weathered. If you're hearing this, it's already too late. The beacon pulsed again. Stronger. Closer. And Elias realized it wasn't warning him. It was calling him. The air in the cavern grew heavier, pressing down on Elias like an invisible weight. The pulse of the beacon deepened into a constant, bone-rattling hum. It was no longer simply a machine. It felt aware, as if it had been waiting for him. Elias forced himself to move, backing away from the frozen pod. His helmet light flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The figure he'd seen, if it had been real, was gone. Yet the sense of being watched clung to him, tightening around his throat. Ariel, he barked, voice brittle. Prepare emergency extraction. Now. No response. Only static. He swallowed hard, forcing his breathing to slow. Think. Focus. He wasn't dead yet, but the walls were cracking, and the machine was stirring. Elias's eyes locked onto the ancient beacon, its dull surface now pulsing in uneven rhythm. The words echoed in his mind. Do not activate. But he hadn't touched it. Not yet. The hum spiked, and with it came a tearing sound, a deep, guttural groan from the ice. A fracture split open behind the beacon, revealing something far worse. A second beacon, identical but shattered, dark and cold. Its surface bore deep gouges, as though someone had tried to destroy it. Half buried beneath the wreckage was another escape pod. Another him. Elias's knees nearly buckled. This one was burned, the suit blackened and torn. The visor was shattered, exposing the withered remains of his own face twisted in a silent scream. No! The words slipped from his lips, barely audible. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a loop, over and over again, and every version of him had failed. A grinding screech tore through the cavern as the beacon flared, flooding the chamber with a sickly blue light. Symbols along the walls flickered to life, crawling like veins of light through the ice. Elias staggered back, shielding his eyes. A voice emerged from the beacon, his own voice, layered and distorted, as if 1,000 versions of himself were speaking at once. You cannot stop this. You can only choose how it ends. Elias's breath quickened. His mind reeled, trying to grasp the impossible. This wasn't a message. It was a conversation. With himself. Choose what? He demanded, turning in a slow circle, searching for the source. What the hell is this? The walls seemed to lean inward, the ice groaning under its own weight. 2 options. That's what it always came down to. Option 1, shut down the beacon, seal the machine in the ice, trap himself here, forever locked in this frozen tomb. No future, no past, just stillness. Option 2, reactivate the engine. Try to reset the loop. Risk everything. He stared at the beacon, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Somewhere buried in the hum was the sound of footsteps, his own. Elias gritted his teeth. Every instinct screamed to destroy the machine, to end this nightmare. But how many times had he done that already? How many frozen corpses? How many burned-out escape pods? Destroying it hadn't worked. He looked at the fractured beacon, the broken machine, the scorched corpse. That was the path of destruction. Failure. Number not this time. Elias turned back to the main beacon and stepped forward. The cold bit into him, seeping through the suit as if the machine itself resisted him. His gloved hands moved over the ancient console, fingers tracing symbols that felt familiar, though he couldn't recall learning them. The hum of the beacon shifted, the symbols brightened, rearranging. Activation. Sequence engaged. The ground shuddered, cracked spiderweb beneath his feet. "Ariel," he growled, "if you can hear me, override the station's fail-safes. Prepare for immediate transport." Static. Then faintly. "Negative. System integrity compromised." Of course, he was on his own. The beacon trembled, the air thick with energy. The ice groaned, fractures splitting wide. Shadows rippled in the corners of his vision, figures moving where none should exist. Faces half seen, half formed, versions of himself, flickering in and out like dying stars. Failures. Failures who had made the wrong choice. The machine roared as the activation sequence neared completion. Time fractured around him, seconds stretching into hours and collapsing back again. Elias felt his body lurch, his thoughts unraveling. Then, silence. The hum stopped. The glow died. Elias opened his eyes. The chamber was still. The beacon, dark. The ice, unmoving. The fractured beacon, gone. Had it worked? His comms crackled to life. "Lee S. Commander Elias Kane, do you copy?" It was Ariel. Elias stumbled forward, breath ragged. "I'm here," he rasped. "Status?" A pause. "Signal anomaly neutralized. No seismic activity detected. Extraction route is clear." He blinked in disbelief. It was over. Or had it only just begun? He turned back toward the beacon, now lifeless. Yet deep within the walls of ice, he thought he heard it. A faint, distant pulse. Slower now, but still there. Elias's limbs felt heavier with every step, as though the silence itself weighed him down. The lifeless beacon loomed behind him, cold and inert. Yet that faint, distant pulse still echoed in the marrow of his bones. He told himself it was just memory, a phantom of the machine's dying breath. But doubt clung to him. The ice tunnel leading back to the surface was darker than before, the walls pressing closer. Elias's helmet light flickered, casting fleeting shadows that slithered and stretched in unnatural ways. Every so often, he thought he caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of his eye. Familiar shapes, brief reflections of himself in the fractured ice. Number he pressed on. The comms crackled in his ear. "Commander Kane, status confirmed. Extraction route is stable. Emergency shuttle is prepped for departure." Ariel's voice returned to its steady monotone, as if nothing had happened. Elias tightened his grip on the ice ladder. "Copy that. I'm on my way." Each rung felt colder than the last. As he neared the surface, the air grew thinner, not physically, but in presence. The walls of the tunnel seemed to lose detail, becoming smooth and featureless. Time itself seemed to blur, seconds stretching too long, footsteps echoing back too slowly. Then, without warning, he emerged into the pale orange haze of Titan's sky. The station stood silent and intact against the endless ice plains, its lights blinking rhythmically in the distance. For a moment, Elias simply stared at it. It looked untouched. No fractures, no signs of collapse, no evidence of what had happened below. He started moving, slow and deliberate. The path to the station felt longer than he remembered, the cold biting deeper. The distant hum in his head grew fainter, but it never vanished. As he approached the station airlock, Ariel's voice returned. "Commander, biometric scan confirms your identity. Welcome back." The doors groaned open, and Elias stepped inside. Warm, sterile air washed over him. For the first time in what felt like days, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. But something was wrong. The interior of Titan Station was pristine. Too pristine. Every console gleamed. Every panel was spotless. No scuff marks, no signs of wear from months of occupation. It felt like walking into a museum exhibit of a life he barely remembered. Elias approached the main console. The screen flickered to life. Current date, March 14th, 2174. He froze. That couldn't be right. When he last checked, it had been March 14th, 2173. Ariel, confirm the current date. Confirmed. March 14th, 2174, a full year. What happened to me? A pause. You never left, Commander. His blood ran cold. That's not possible. He stopped, struggling to form words. His mind recoiled. Commander, Ariel interrupted, its tone perfectly calm. Please proceed to the observation deck. There is something you need to see. Elias hesitated, then turned slowly toward the corridor. The hum in his head grew louder with each step. The corridor seemed longer than before, the walls stretching impossibly far. But he kept moving. At the observation deck, the reinforced glass stretched wide, revealing the endless horizon of Titan. Except it wasn't the Titan he knew. Above the ice plains, something hung in the sky. A fracture, like a scar across reality itself, faint and distant, pulsing with dim blue light. It was the beacon, or the shadow of it, rippling, faint, but undeniably there. Elias's reflection stared back at him in the glass. But for a brief, flickering moment, it wasn't his face. It was older, hollow, watching. Elias stood frozen, staring at the fracture in the sky. An open wound across the fabric of space, pulsing faintly with that familiar, cold blue light. It was distant, yet impossibly close, as if it stretched beyond space and time itself. The beacon wasn't gone. He hadn't ended it. His breath fogged the observation glass. For a moment he saw his reflection again, older, hollow-eyed, watching him. And then it was gone. Just him now, or so he wanted to believe. Ariel, he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Explain the anomaly. Silence, then, softly, as if hesitant. Anomaly detected. Temporal fracture, unresolved. Elias swallowed hard. Can it be sealed? Another pause. Longer this time. Unknown. The hum in his bones deepened. He could feel it now, a subtle vibration threading through the walls of the station. The pulse of the beacon, slower, fainter, but alive, waiting. Elias closed his eyes. How many times had he been here before? How many versions of him had stared into this same fracture, believing they had won? His fists clenched. The cold metal of the console bit into his palms. He had escaped the ice, the machine, the loop. But the shadow of it remained, stitched into the sky. Into him. He could stay, watch it, wait for it to awaken again. Or he could leave, pretend it was over. But deep down, Elias knew there was no leaving this behind. Not really. The comms crackled softly in his helmet, though he hadn't activated them. A voice, his own. You're not done yet. Elias opened his eyes. The fracture pulsed once, slowly, and far in the distance, beyond Titan's icy horizon, something pulsed back. Not a beacon, a response. Elias turned from the observation deck, the hum following him like a shadow, and he began to walk.